I'm Brice Futch.
And I'm Tony Melton.
And this is The Way Forward. Welcome to episode 10, the final episode of this first season of the Way Forward podcast. We are super thankful for you staying with us and learning with us as we talk to some incredible folks that know a whole lot more than we do about the issues facing us today right now with China. I want to start by asking Father Tony kind of what his thoughts are on this season. When we first started, he had mentioned to me, when I approached him about being the co-host, he had mentioned, he's like, I don't know anything about China. This isn't something that I've thought about, that I've been engaged on. But I really appreciate the way he thinks. I appreciate the way he reasons. And so I also, the goal of this podcast is to talk about these ideas with people who don't have a history of international relations and who haven't been studying this, because we want to make it understandable. We want to make it applicable to you. So, Tony, tell us a little bit about kind of how this, what are some takeaways that you've had from this season? What are some things that you've learned, some things you've enjoyed? What are your thoughts?
Your question makes me think back to when I was, I think, in high school. And I can't exactly remember how old I was, but, we had the thing with Iraq and Saddam Hussein, and, there was accusation of real human rights violations. But then, when I was in college, it was like, it was all about the oil.
Yeah.
And it left me kind of in the same state of confusion that I feel like a lot of people, myself included, have about China. Mm-hmm. China is this economic superpower, mm-hmm. and so is America. And I've always heard that people can be really upset about China or really call him a bad actor, and we should be really, really against China. This is a really big theme in the Trump campaign in 2020. And then others, not to say that they were lauding China as a great nation, but they just didn't seem to be as concerned and, dude, chill out.
Come on, man.
Yeah. So I kind of came into this season uninformed, and therefore didn't have real reasons for being where I am now, mm-hmm. which is a lot more not anti-China. Sure. I see them as a bad actor, mm-hmm. And I'm aware of the things that they're doing that have hackled up some of the people that I know that have been quite angry at China, mm-hmm. and for us taking an aggressive approach towards them. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess I could say anti-China.
Sure.
Yeah, maybe that would be not too far. So I feel like this season we've progressively gone through all of the different ways that China is acting in ways that do not benefit the world. Mm-hmm. Not just our country, but do not benefit the world. They're playing out a worldview which is just toxic, mm-hmm. to their soul and the soul of the whole world. So it has been very informative to me. We're always talking about China.
Sure. Well, and it's one of those things too, where like China's been a problem for a while.
Yeah.
Like it's not like this is just all of a sudden in the last 5 years.
Right.
They've been an issue for a long time, but the things that they're doing are but they're not adding up. They're multiplying, right? Like it gets progressively worse. 10, 15 years ago, there wasn't 1.8 million Uyghurs in concentration camps, right? Like it's been building on itself, and we're getting to this point where I wouldn't say it's a now or never, because I don't think that's necessarily true, but I think if we wait much longer, it's going to be much harder
to engage them.
Yes, that's the word I was looking for. It's
productively.
Yeah, it is. It's going to take a while.
Yeah, so I think, from what I understand, Brice, we were going to go just quickly back through the main headings of this season.
Right.
The name of this podcast is The Way Forward. And so we wanted to end it on a note of where have we gone, and what way forward do those things, point us towards? Mm-hmm. So what is the way forward
sure.
for, let's just take the first one, intellectual property.
Yeah.
We had an episode about protections. Mm-hmm. We even addressed it from like a human, a philosophy of human nature and dignity element. But like, what's our way forward both on a national level, but also at a local level. Sure. What were your takeaways?
Yeah, so I think the two biggest things are expanding, and as a conservative, I hate to use these words, but expanding government protections for small business. Anytime the government gets into and it puts their hands in anything, it gets progressively worse, in my opinion. But there are certain roles that only the state can fulfill, right? And so for a local mom and pop or a startup entrepreneur that's doing something tech-wise that China wants to get their hands on and copy or steal, like we talked about in that episode, those businesses don't have the capital to create these cyber defenses that they need. So I don't know exactly what that looks like, but there needs to be increased cyber protections for these local companies that's either subsidized by the government, funded by the government, or run. And like I said, I hate to say that as a conservative. I really do. But
you
I don't know.
Redeemed it. You said big government, but for small business.
Yes.
Right. I feel like that cancels out the.
Yes. So I think there needs to be some protections on the government. I don't think they need to know everything that's going on, but I don't think that they're, in order for it to be cost effective, I don't think that it's something that would come from individuals. I think it would be something that would be much broader.
Okay.
Yeah, and I also think buying local is really important. So Amazon is one of those users we talked about where the folks in China will steal these products, they'll copy them, and then they'll sell them on Amazon. I use Amazon all the time. I have nothing against them as a company. I think they provide a great service. But if you are buying from Amazon, look at who the sellers are. Are they a company in your state? Are they a company in the United States? Or there's information on them as individuals or as entities. Look at that information before you buy. Figure out what kind of company they are, where are they at, where are they from, are they selling legitimate goods? That's a big question to ask. It takes a little more time, but it will make a difference.
Yeah. So you're saying put the onus more local on these on insisting upon human rights or intellectual property. I mean, I know you mentioned Rubio's bill.
Yes.
About putting the onus on not on the buyer, but on the provider, the seller. And so, but that kind of is running in the same vein of what you just mentioned. It's it's basically taking it's taking us away from a finger wagger, like, hey, you guys over there in China, you guys better get your act together or else. Right. And it's saying that, hey, if you want to sell to citizens in America, you better make sure that this property is legitimate, that this product is legitimate, both in terms of its intellectual property, how it came to be, but also in terms of its labor and human rights. But you're also saying to press it even more local. This is something that really should be owned by each of citizens. Yeah,
it should. So Rubio's bill would require that companies look at their supply chain and make sure that there is no forced labor being used to create their product in China. Yeah. And that would go a long way to de-incentivizing the Chinese government from creating these concentration camps, right? So the reason they have these camps is there's a multitude of reasons, one of which is that they think the way these people think is bad and wrong, and they want to change that. They want to get rid of their culture. They want to get rid of their background, their identity as people, and make them members of the state. But they also use it for economic gains because they can take these people, require them to work, force them into creating these products, and then sell them very cheaply and make money off of it. So it's one of the ways to de-incentivize that process. Right. The other thing that I think is really important here is the way we tax goods. So there's this thing called the fair tax. In 2015, 2016, I had the privilege of working for Mike Huckabee's presidential campaign. I was a South Carolina field director. And it was a job that I was wholly unqualified for and kind of fell into. But I was blessed to have a really great boss who knew her stuff and has gone on to do some really incredible things. And she took me under her wing. But all that to say, Governor Huckabee was big on the fair tax. And so the fair tax is a national sales tax. It is not a value-added tax. It's not a VAT tax. But it taxes the current proposal is at 12%. So 12% sales tax across the board on all new items. So if you buy something used, you buy used clothes from Goodwill, you buy a used car, you buy a house, there would be no tax on that item, which would be huge. So if you wanted to give a working mom of two a pay raise, don't look at increasing the minimum wage. Let her keep her entire paycheck, right? So there would be no federal sales tax, or there would be no federal income tax. There would be no Social Security tax.
Purchases, correct, not income.
Right. So you tax for what you spend, not what you make. And the reason why it would work so well is there's a lot of people that currently avoid paying income taxes for a variety of reasons. Federal income tax doesn't do anything to affect state taxes. But if you think about the people that are dealing drugs, prostitutes, bad actors, illegal immigrants that aren't paying taxes, they would be forced to pay whenever they bought a new item or good.
So it would be, yeah. I can see. Okay.
So the reason why that's beneficial for us with China is if you look at, if you take the chairs we're sitting in, they're exactly the same. And if your chair was produced in the United States and my chair was produced in China, your chair, roughly 12% of the cost of that chair is tied up in taxes. So if we get rid of those taxes on those businesses, so they're not having to pay that Social Security tax, et cetera, they would be able to sell that chair for 12% less. And you would say, but then the argument comes back of, well, why would they sell it for less if they could just make 12% more profit? Well, it's because they would be able to compete with Chinese goods. So the chair that comes in from China is roughly 12% less because of the way that the cost breakdown is set up. So the amount of money they're paying to produce it, the amount of money they're paying for the materials to produce it is less because China subsidizes those industries, or their pay is just less overall. So there's roughly a 12% price difference between the two goods. So if you implemented the fair tax, those goods would now be roughly the same price, and people who make less money would be able to make a better buying decision and could afford to pay for things made in the United States, made locally.
So our current tax structure only affects those that live within the United States.
Correct.
And so therefore it creates a price inflation for our goods, and it doesn't affect China. Right. So theirs come in cheaper.
Yeah, because there's no
having a fair tax.
Right.
It would basically be able to plop that tax on American and Chinese goods.
Yes.
Together.
Equally.
Therefore, putting that inflation, so to speak, that tax bump, on both American and Chinese goods.
Correct. Exactly. So, yeah, and there's also we can go into the weeds on this later, but there's a prebate for people that are United States citizens. So they base it off of the poverty level and how much of essential goods you buy. So they consider essential goods like produce, bread,
beer.
Yes,
sure.
Beer, and then like toiletries, things like that. So they would give you a check at the beginning of every month that would cover the amount of taxes that you would spend on an average amount of those items. So based off how many people are in your house, they say, here's about how much of this stuff you will use.
Okay.
Here's a prebate, so it doesn't cost you any more money. But the people who are not United States citizens, people who are here as illegal immigrants, people who are here on vacation, et cetera, they would be paying that full tax on all of those items as well.
I have 100 questions on this fair tax. This is super interesting. I never heard of that.
It is a phenomenal system.
But I can see why this would specifically be a hit to China, because one of the ways they continue to grow in their influence is by being able to undercut American goods for a variety of nefarious reasons.
Yes. And there's actually cases now where China is investing in very impoverished countries in Africa, and they're exporting equipment and managers to run factories in these African countries for about half per day of what they'd be paying a Chinese worker to work in their factory. So they're undercutting that process even more, and then they're shipping those goods either back to China to sell for less or back to the United States to sell for even less.
Wow.
Yep. So I think changing that tax structure would be really important to help us bring these local goods back to a fair market value and to be able to compete.
Now, we've been talking mainly about supply chain and things like that, and specifically how they impact our perspective and approach to human rights violations within China. But there's obviously more going on than just the supply chain.
Sure.
There are the humans and that are being put in concentration camps.
Yep.
The Uyghur population is what we spent the most time on.
Yeah.
We didn't spend as much time on the 1 now 2 child rule in China, which is of course another violation.
Terrific.
So let's talk just about human rights in and of themselves, quite apart from the supply chain. But what are our takeaways from that?
Yeah. So human rights, it starts with telling the story, right? Yeah. So we talked about this a little bit in the last episode, where sharing something on social media is not activism. right? Like it's like that's not enough. Like you can't. I don't think that in good conscience you can share a post on Facebook about any topic that's important to you and say, okay, I've done my due diligence. But that is a part of that calculation. It is a part of what we should be doing to tell the story about what's going on, because it is a public awareness. A lot of people still do not understand how horrible these human rights abuses are in China. And until you talked about having an informed electorate, until we have a populace that understands here's what's going on, here's what's happening, Congress isn't going to be pressured enough. The Senate is not going to be pressured enough. The president's not going to be pressured enough to continue to take more serious action. We also can make a difference with our dollars, right? Like there are a number of nonprofits. China Aid is one of them, which Logan Carmichael was one of our guests on that show, that work with people in China to get them out or to try and affect change within the system, to relax regulations on house churches, on Uyghurs that are imprisoned. They're doing some incredible work, incredible humanitarian work, and we can give to those organizations. We can help support what they're doing. And we can find friends to help give as well. So that's a big part of it. So telling the story, supporting them with our dollars, but then also going back to the supply chain piece, just continuing to be conscious of what we're buying and where is it coming from. Because in today's economy, the chances that it's being created by forced labor is incredibly high.
Yeah, I think sometimes people have this idea that, well, there's just human rights violations going on everywhere, and they almost feel it's so diluted in their ability to react appropriately and productively. Mm-hmm. And I don't know. I feel like that's a little bit of a misnomer, because this is a severe human rights violation.
Sure.
This is a superpower in the world.
Right.
This is in the scale of millions of people that are being affected in the worst of ways. We didn't even talk about organ harvesting, which is a real thing.
Yeah, it is.
And so, I don't think it's for those that are listening. I don't think it's a stretch for us to say that every single person should know what the word Uyghur means.
Yes, 100%.
Everyone should have Uyghur, Uyghur in their vocabulary. It should be a thing we talk about.
Yep.
And it's okay. It's right. It's appropriate, even given the massive stretch of the world, the huge population of the world, all of the different things that are going on. It is right to focus on this one thing, especially.
Right.
It's not out of proportion.
Yeah. And I think the issue is we have a culture that loves to virtue signal, right? Yeah. And so we take these little, what comparably little problems and blow them out of proportion.
Right.
So the fact that somebody in a third world country is making $5 a day or living off $5 a day, like, that's not an actual crisis. Because if you look at how far that $5 goes within their culture and within their context, it's not that terrible, right? Like, should they be making more? Yes, but it's not the same as being thrown into a concentration camp and having your organs harvested, or being continually raped, or being forced to have an abortion. Like, it's not on that same scale. Now, there are a lot of hurting people everywhere, and we are called to help where we can, when we can.
Right.
And, for people listening, they may listen to this and say, supporting the Uyghurs is not something that's, it's not something that stirs my conscience, but there's this problem over here is, and that's okay, right? Like, not everybody has to be as stirred as everybody else.
Sure.
But like you said, you need to know about it. You need to be able to talk about it. You need to be able to advocate when the opportunity arises to do so.
And there are certain things that happen. Everyone goes back to World War II because it was a moment in human history where something so egregious was happening that it automatically deserved a response.
Right.
No matter what it cost. And that's and we still have that and that's what we tell about our story as humans.
Right.
This was so bad that we must do something. We did.
Right.
Took us a little while. We did.
Yes.
And I think we're seeing things brewing in China, if not already happening. I think they already are happening.
Yeah.
At a scale which is so egregious that it warrants a response. So I think that's my big takeaway. This isn't an option.
Yeah.
And to use even just a little bit of pushback to the example you just gave, if someone would say, "Yeah, this doesn't afflict my conscience. This does," I'd be like, "Hey, really glad that you care about this over here. You need to add this.
Yeah.
You have room for two."
Sure. Sure. I don't disagree with that.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So Now that's a lot more on a local level.
Yeah.
But we said at the beginning that we were going to give 2 levels of the way forward. So what's the way forward with regards to human rights violations in China? What is our national step? What ought Washington to do?
So there's a lot of conversation on this, and a lot of good people disagree. I think right now the Olympics just started at the time of this recording, and so there was a diplomatic boycott of the Olympics. So they basically just said, if you're a government official, you can't go, and we're gonna use that as a way to show that we disapprove of the way China is conducting its things. I think that was very good. I think that was wise. Some people said we should have gone further and boycotted the games altogether. I don't necessarily think that makes sense. I think back, without falling down to this philosophical fallacy, going back to the 1930s when Jesse Owens went and competed in the Berlin Olympics, I think that was the absolute best place that he could have been on those days.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know that there's an exact parallel to today because as far as I'm aware, there aren't any Uyghurs participating in the Winter Olympics. But that would have been the equivalent, right? I think nationally making stands like that is important, and I think we should be more aggressive than less aggressive. I don't think, from a human rights perspective, I don't think there's a whole lot where we could misstep by being too aggressive. I think militarily that's a different conversation, but diplomatically with sanctions, etc., I don't think there's a whole lot that we could mess up by being more aggressive than we currently are. I also think having politicians that are willing to speak out about this at a national level is becoming more and more important, right? So the owner, I believe it was, I'm 99% sure it was the Los Angeles Lakers, one of the owners, said that when it comes to human rights and things he cares about, the Uyghurs are not on his level. That's almost a direct quote. And he caught a lot of flack about it. And he came back out later and said, well, I didn't actually mean that. And here's what I actually meant by it. But if you watch the interview, it's very clear that is exactly what he meant, that he did not care at all, and that he was not concerned about it. And he really just wanted his team to be able to continue to play and sell their games in China because there's a lot of money there. So I think if we had more of a, we talked also a little bit in the last episode about the power of the executive and having a strong executive. Teddy Roosevelt talks about having the bully pulpit. The president should have jumped. I think that a comment like that is at the president's level. I think that's something that he should have come out and condemned very strongly and said that this is at your level. This is at everybody's level. This is at my level. This is a problem. I think that would have gotten a lot of attention, but he didn't do it. I think those are the opportunities that we miss at a national level to speak out and to draw attention to it. I think some of the things that are currently going forward, like we talked about with Marco Rubio, he's one of the co-sponsors on that bill. I think that's a really strong move to help de-incentivize economically anyway U.S. companies from being bad actors in these other nations. Because that's one of the things that's frustrating too, right? Like you have a company or an organization like the NBA that is speaking out very strongly on social issues here in the United States. But then you have another country that's literally throwing people into concentration camps and they're saying nothing. And they're apologizing whenever somebody makes a bad tweet about something that they said. Seeing John Cena, this strong man, basically break down in tears when he's apologizing for saying he made a disparaging comment, either that Hong Kong or Taiwan was not a part of China. And he apologized in Mandarin, in tears, that he misspoke and he wanted their forgiveness. Like that's insanity. It's absolutely absurd. And so I think when we look at this as a national issue, it's not just what is DC politics doing? What are people who have a national voice doing and saying? And the way we influence those people is local. It starts with us, and it starts with how we talk about it and how we approach it and if we approve of them or not.
So we just to kind of go back through where we've covered so far, we've reviewed intellectual property. We've also talked about the fair tax, which was super interesting, and then human rights. But there's also just kind of the old school, land and sea.
Yeah.
And understanding exactly how China is seeking to grow their power and influence over the world. not just through their intellectual property,
Yeah.
not just through their domination of minorities and people groups within their country, but actually in other countries and with the expansion of their territory. So we've got the South Sea, we've got Taiwan, we have the islands that they're creating, which I find really impressive. It is cool. So kudos to China for being able to like figure that out. Bad China for doing it. I wish I could create my own island, but not for these reasons, of course. But it's just it's very important that we know kind of what they're doing. You mentioned the Belt and Road Initiative. Yeah. Belt and Road Initiative. What did I miss any that they're doing to kind of expand their power over land and sea?
No, I think those are the big pieces. Those are the ones to be aware of. Those are the ones to note and to try and figure out how to counter. I think one of the things that it comes back to is the way is a comparison between the Belt and Road Initiative, which is China's version of foreign aid, and the way USAID or USAID does theirs. So USAID was born out of the Marshall Plan. So Marshall Plan was post World War II. We're going to rebuild Europe. We're going to get Europe back on its feet. So we're going to supply all of these different types of goods. We're going to give them an influx of grain because their farmers weren't able to produce. We were going to give them clothing because they didn't have any resources. We were doing all of these things, and we were basically just exporting United States goods until Europe's economy could get its feet back underneath it and they could start producing again. We've then taken that model and applied it to countries that have no rule of law, that have a fine farming industry, that have a good textiles industry, but need more support on the intellectual property rights, that need more support on the property, like physical property law, that have good business practice. They need development on their business practices, etc. They don't need rice, right? Like a great example of this is Haiti. So Haiti has just consistently been in turmoil between natural disasters and political uprisings. And in that episode, we talked about the series from Acton, which is I believe the series is called The Poverty Cure, and the movie is called Poverty Inc. I recommend both of them to you. But in it, they talk about this business who produce solar panels in Haiti, and they were Haitians. They were using goods created in Haiti. They were recycling materials. They were teaching skills. They were high-paying jobs, and they had a contract with I believe it was a contract with the government to put these all over the city for streetlights, so that they could have streetlights to create this safer environment. After this last, I don't remember if it was a earthquake or a hurricane. They came through, and there was a whole bunch of devastation on the island. Well, these United States companies that also produce solar panels got together with USAID, and they started sending these United States solar panels to Haiti. And I don't remember if they actually put this business out of business or if they just totally crippled them and they're still trying to struggle and survive. But here was an opportunity for the United States to help. And what do? We shut down a really good high-paying job in the country. Haitians also talk about rice, right? So Bill Clinton famously sent large amounts of rice to Haiti, and he came out a number of years later and apologized. And he apologized, and I give him huge kudos for doing this. He apologized to Haitians because he said, I made policies that were good for my farmers in Arkansas that were horrible for you. And Haitians didn't eat rice all the time. It was, if they produced it on their island, they would eat it maybe 1 or 2 meals a week, and that was it. But since USAID has been sending free rice to Haiti, it's on their plate 3 meals a day, every single day, because it's cheap, and it's filled this sector of their economy, and it's destroyed all of these others. When we collect T-shirts at church to send to Kenya, right, as a part of this relief effort. Well, Kenya, you used to be able to go to a store in Kenya and buy a shirt that said made with Kenya cotton. And now you can't do that anymore because we have totally destroyed their textiles industry by sending them used T-shirts with Marvel comics on the front of them. Like it's just the way we do aid is really poor. And China has looked at that and said, we want people to actually like us. We want people to want our help. And so they're doing that by building infrastructure. And we'll talk, that's actually what we've talked about having our next season on, is what infrastructure is, all that kind of stuff. But building ports, building roads, equipping their militaries. They're making these large dollar investments in these countries for long-term partnerships. right? It's that long-term strategy, that long-term mindset. So defense policy, in my opinion, when it comes to China, is going to be tied to if we continue to do aid the way we always have been, or how do we change that mindset in that mold to build these long-term partnerships with these other countries that need legitimate help and want legitimate help. Like, Africans are not dumb, right? Like, Africans just need access to better infrastructure. They need access to Wi-Fi. They need access to tools. Like, they have the capacity to create and to build and to develop, but they just don't have any of the pieces of the puzzle that they need yet. And that's where a country like China is really stepping up their game, and the United States has fallen behind.
Well, this has been a great season.
I think so. I've enjoyed it.
Appreciate you inviting me to be a part of it, Brice. This has been a good experience for me. So I hope, listeners, that this has been good for you. It's been 10 episodes, a nice even number. Brice intimated that an idea for next season's topic will be infrastructure. I think that's still a little bit up in the air, yes. But that's kind of where we're thinking. And but regardless, we're going to continue the same theme of trying to bring these big issues, which are complex, and try to boil them down to what the common man needs to know, and kind of the way forward from there. Uninformed here. So this has been fun for me.
Likewise, we really appreciate the time. Thank you all for listening. Don't forget to check out our website, thewayforwardpodcast.com. We'd love to hear from you there on our Facebook page. Like and share. We'd really appreciate the support. But thanks for being on the journey, and we look forward to seeing you next season. I'm Brice Futch.
I'm Tony Melton.
And you've been listening to The Way Forward.